2024 started out well enough. We were all happy and optimistic and ready for an exciting leap year, but it quickly devolved into destruction, death, dismemberment, all sorts of terrible things. I'm Carl, and today I'm going to tell you about 3 of the biggest travesties of 2024 in Utah historic preservation. On a quiet Easter morning in 2024, families in Salt Lake City were off to church or searching for Easter eggs or gorging on candy or just sleeping in and enjoying a nice quiet Sunday. Until a housing developer showed up with a bulldozer and started tearing down a historic church in Salt Lake City. Now, this wasn't just a historic church. It was old, yes. But it had also been used as a Buddhist temple. It was also a nightclub where Nirvana played some of their early concerts. So this was really a historic place and the Historic Preservation Commission, which he should have done. So concerned citizens quickly called the city, who came and put a stop to the destruction. And a few days later, it was determined by the city that this developer would have to rebuild the building to the condition that it was in before he started bulldozing it. So he didn't have to make it like usable and in perfect shape, but he definitely has to pay to put it back together the way it was when he started tearing it down. But the damage has been done. I think the original part of the building is still there. I believe it was just an addition that had been torn down, but still a historic part of a historic building. And you can't just rebuild history, even if you reuse the old bricks, which Preservation Utah, to their credit, got tons of people out, and they went through the rubble and they found bricks that can be reused. So they're going to reuse as much original material as they can. But it's not going to be the same. It's not the same building just because you use the same materials and make it look the same. So the damage is done. And the building has a new owner who has pledged to restore the building and keep it a part of the community. And in other church building news, I don't have another church building on the list here, but another church in 2024 that was historic and slated to be torn down, burned in a fire. This story involves, of course, a real estate developer. Edge Homes approached West Valley City about redeveloping the Redwood Drive-In Theater and Swap Meet property, which opened in 1948. So it's a historic drive-in movie theater, one of 3 left in Utah, now 2 in Utah, and also home to a popular swap meet, which local small businesses and individuals just trying to build up their business.
Guys, how does anybody start a business in Utah with the way that the economy is? When renting costs and everything else is up, how does a little business owner start up a little shop when their overhead cost is going to be $4,000 to $5,000 minimum on a monthly basis? Whereas out here, it's just a few $100s. It allows the American dream to kind of stay alive.
So closing the swap meet would create some hardship for a lot of people who relied on that money as their income, or at least part of their income. When they approached the city about saving the swap meet, the city said, no, we can't force the owners of the drive-in to continue the swap meet. It's a business thing, and they're allowed to do the business or not do the business. There were protests, of course, and letters and petitions sent in, even a letter signed by state legislators to the city council of West Valley City, begging them to save the theater and save the swap meet by not allowing the rezoning for this development. They could at least do that, even if they couldn't intervene in the business of the swap meet and the theater. They at least had the power and authority to prevent the theater from being torn down, or at least developed into a housing development. They, of course, voted in September to allow the rezoning of that property, and that sealed the fate of the theater and the swap meet. People still tried. It was too late, though, and the last swap meet was held on December 22nd, so not too long ago. In the city of Cottonwood Heights, Utah, still in the Salt Lake City area, there's a historic mill called the Granite Paper Mill, where paper was produced for the Deseret News until the 1880s, I believe, 1890s. And the mill has stood ever since. Well, part of it, because it burned down in the 1890s. And it was rebuilt and reopened a few times over the years and had more fires. Basically, it's a pile of rubble, but it's the site of the old mill, and some of the walls are still up, and some of the features from it being used as a nightclub still exist. The building is on the National Register of Historic Places, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything as far as protection. That protects it from the government coming and tearing it down without going through a lengthy process. Otherwise, it depends on the city and what ordinances they have in place for historic buildings. Cottonwood Heights does have a historic preservation commission. I think they call it a committee, but commission nonetheless, which is supposed to oversee these things. And the planning commission is supposed to make sure that a certain process is followed before any historic buildings are, torn down or added to or significantly changed in any way. So when, you guessed it, a developer came to the city and said, we want to build condos and townhouses and single-family homes in this area, the city, of course, bent over backwards to make it happen. However, citizens caught wind that part of this plan was tearing down that old mill, and people freaked out. Suddenly, people cared about this dilapidated, falling apart mill. People wrote letters, they showed up to city council meetings, they went to the Historic Preservation Commission. The problem ended up being that the low estimates for fixing this building and making it something that people could go into, I don't know what level of renovation they were talking about, but at least making it up to code so they could open it so humans could go in safely. The low estimates were about $50 million, which is double the operating cost of Cottonwood Heights City. And they didn't even own the property. The property owner said they would deed the land to the city if the city restored the building. But that is a ton of money. And none of the city council, understandably, felt comfortable spending that much money to make this building usable. So the Historic Preservation Commission approached the Planning Committee and the City Council with a recommendation that the developer's request to have a rule changed so that they could start building as soon as possible, rather than waiting a year and gathering public input and coming up with alternative plans other than tearing down historic buildings. The Historic Preservation Commission recommended that the developer follow that rule. And as far as I know, I haven't seen any minutes from meetings that mention this yet, but as far as I know, this is still ongoing. They may have made a decision, and I feel like the developer is going to get what they want, because the Planning Commission was very concerned that if they made a big deal about the mill, they would lose the entire development altogether. And my gut tells me that in Cottonwood Heights, as in many places, by the time the Historic Preservation Commission is consulted, the decision is probably already made. I think the fate of the mill is already decided, whether they've made it official or not. But it's yet another building in Utah that was allowed to crumble and fall down, and nobody cared until it was too late. So I guess the question of 2024, as far as history and preservation are concerned, is, do we really even care about our history? Or do we only care when it's going away? At that point, it's usually too late. We've usually allowed these buildings to get into a condition in which they can't be saved at any reasonable cost without basically rebuilding the entire thing. So we need to ask ourselves, do we care? And what history do we care about? And what do we need to preserve in our communities? And you need to be involved in your communities. A lot of communities have historic preservation commissions. They all have planning commissions. They all have city councils. See, one of the big problems, I think, is that a lot of these deals happen behind closed doors. There are a lot of confidential business deals that go down in your local city hall that you don't even know about. Businesses trying to get tax breaks or property breaks or things rezoned like drive-in theaters. So the people trying to make the money get to meet with the people who are supposed to represent you, and they make these deals. And by the time they are no longer confidential and you get to know about it, a lot of the decision making is already done. A lot of the tax breaks have already been promised. A lot of the rezonings have already been promised. It's too late by the time you know about it. So the best way to prevent these travesties from happening is to be involved from the beginning and to say, hey, we need to preserve this building over here. We need to protect it. We need to do something in our city to make sure that these historic properties don't go away, because they're going away. Developers are coming to Utah. They're building houses like crazy everywhere you can think of, and they don't care about historic buildings. They care about making money. They're in business. The city cares about growing and getting new businesses and getting new residents. They all care about money. They don't care about historic properties. So it's up to you to tell your city that they need to do something about historic properties. 2024 super sucked, I think, for history and historic preservation in Utah, and for other personal reasons as well. I could go on and on about how much 2024 sucks. But for those three reasons, those three stories, those three lost historic properties are reason enough to say that 2024 was an epic fail. Anyway, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.